This reading is from this reading is from censored number 117, and the title is The Devil's Economics by William J. Eisenman. Capitalism is America's economic religion. Some worshippers will admit that the system is not perfect, that it needs rules and regulations to put the brakes on its rapacious core. They say that capitalism just needs to be domesticated, but otherwise it's the best of all economic systems. We not only hear this blather from secular humanists, but we hear it from so called Christians who should know better. What happened to God's economics? In the Bible, God presented an economic system to ancient Israel that was equitable and gave every man his own land and way to make a living. God's economics was far superior to the capitalistic system that has us in its clutches today. In the millennium, God will again institute his economic system, but this time for the whole world. Why do many of those calling themselves Christians put so much time and effort into such issues as secular humanism and abortion, rather than to take note of the suffering caused by our form of capitalism, the devil's economics? The Bible is silent on abortion, and humans have been given 6,000 years to do things their own way until they come to the knowledge that they need God. Matthew 24. Concern for these manufactured issues prevent us from coming to terms with issues of our survival, poverty, and the road to our prosperity, the real problems of society. With this in mind, let's examine this capitalistic system a bit more closely. During both world wars, taxes went up on the rich and inequality declined. Taxes were raised a few percentage points during Bill Clinton's presidency, and 22 million jobs were created, and he left office with a surplus of $125 billion in his last year. G.W. Bush's tax cuts, wars, and Medicare Part D were all off the books, all on the credit card. All of this debt was handed to the Obama administration, who put it all on the books. High taxes on the wealthy are good for the country and the economy. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal created a viable middle class in this country. This ended the dominant position of the wealthy elite. But as is clear today, corporations and the wealthy elites had taken over our country, and they are in the process of decimating workers and the middle class. Today, the wealthy, the powerful, and corporations have co opted our democracy. Our government, that is, those running the show, are married to big money and big corporations. Our government has been infiltrated by corporate sympathizers and enablers, and the people's interests are of no concern. Simply stated, our government, our government is fascist. Marriage between government and corporations is fascism. Marriage between government and corporations is fascism. Ask Mussolini. The Tea Party is right to want to take back our government, but not by destroying the system. We need to repopulate it with those who aren't corrupt and whores and truly want to do the people's business and promote the general welfare. Contrary to their rhetoric and excuses, the vast majority of Tea partiers are Republicans. Jack Kemp and Dick Armey's Freedom Works is an astroturf organization that is behind the Tea Party movement. The Koch brothers also support Tea Party groups. Tea Partiers are more extreme than moderate Republicans, which makes them dangerous because they lack knowledge of fundamentals. They are hell bent to destroy the United States government, and the debt ceiling crisis proved this. Their reading of things is, quote, insane, unquote. By 1928, 10% of the US population controlled 49.3% of the nation's income. Yet by 1953, the bottom 90% of the population shared 67.7% of the economic pie. But by 2006, all these gains were reversed, and the top 10% gobbled up 49.7% of the nation's income. This did not happen by chance or because of some invisible hand operating in the free market. Between 1973 and 2006, the United States economy tripled in size, and the average income for the bottom 90% of the population was $32,135 in 2007 dollars. But even with the tripling of the economy, the bottom 90% lost out. Their average income fell to $31,528, less than in 1973. During this period, the average income of the top 10% doubled from $138,738 to $276,140. Incomes of the top 1% rose 221%, and the top tenth of a percent experienced an income rise of 441%. Again, not a natural phenomenon. During the 1950s, corporations paid $1 in every $4 in federal taxes. And in 2000, the figure dropped to 1 in 10. This shortfall, of course, was made up on the backs of working people as a result of Social Security taxes, excise taxes, and fees. It is hard to understand how such a scenario played out in a country that claims to be Christian. When the federal income tax was introduced in 1913, it was levied on only those who were well-to-do. Today, those with money don't want to pay any taxes. They claim to be job creators and therefore should be treated in a special manner. It seems never to occur to them that it is not fair or Christian to take taxes from those who have little money. All thoughts of relativity are absent from their analyses. They seem not to grasp the fact that if they don't want to pay high taxes, then don't make a lot of money. They will bitch and moan about the 40% of Americans who pay other taxes but not federal taxes because they don't make enough money. Right-wing conservative Republicans and their enablers want the following for corporations: freedom for companies to screw their workers, freedom to pollute anytime and anywhere, freedom from regulations that might protect the public interest. They want the wealthy and corporations to be free of paying their fair share of taxes. Small business in America creates about 2/3 of all the jobs in our economy. The United States classifies a small business as one that employs 500, 1,000, or 1,500 workers. When conservative Republicans talk about tax cuts creating jobs, they conveniently confuse multinational corporations with small business. They fail to explain that the jobs created by big corporations these days are in other countries. 3% of Americans are millionaires. And since the founding of this country, only 10% of us have ever moved up into the elite wealthy class. The United States is not a meritocracy or an upwardly mobile society. Today, even the American dream no longer exists. American workers enjoy fewer opportunities to pull themselves up by the bootstraps than do the citizens of other advanced countries. Conservative ideology has infiltrated our popular psyche and has us believing that Americans who work hard, are intelligent and skillful, will get rewarded for these traits by moving upward into the rarefied atmosphere of the well-to-do. This is nonsense. In America, a child's economic position is heavily influenced by that of his or her parents. It is extremely difficult to get ahead in America. It is much easier to move upward in France, Canada, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Many of us in America live by myths of which America as a meritocracy is one. Keeping all this in mind, it is important to realize that the creation of the middle class is not a natural phenomenon. It was created by providing good quality public education, mandating minimum wages, guaranteeing workers the right to form a union. In the end, it was government intervention in the economy that gave birth to the middle class. Every other phrase out of the mouths of corporate apologists and enablers of corporate corruption and power is the free market. What conservatives refer to as the free market is a rigged deck. It is rigged so that only certain people come out ahead and that incomes flow upward. These things are built into the system, and this puts others at a great disadvantage. Some rules of a real free market system might be: regulations in the public interest would be needed to check greed, to avoid disaster in the financial sector, which will always cause financial crises. We also need heavy regulation. As it stands, the private sector can never serve public needs. The recent financial meltdown was proof of all of this. Every regulation that was in place to prevent such a crisis was removed from our laws. The fat cats have a firm grip on our government and the free market. They socialize the risk, have you and me pay for their mistakes and greed, and privatize the profits. It is simply reverse socialism. The financial sector is bloated and represents only 10% of our economy, and it produces nothing. Whenever taxes come up in conversations, someone is bound to rant that 40% of Americans pay no federal income taxes. The reason they don't pay any federal income taxes because they don't make enough money. The top 1% of taxpayers pay more federal income taxes than the bottom 90% of taxpayers because they make more money. As far as state and local taxes are concerned, the top 1% pay 5%, while the bottom 50% pay 10%. The bottom 80% pay 9% in Social Security taxes, and the top 1% pays 1.6%. The largest share of federal revenues, about 42%, is from the income tax. And the next largest share, about 40%, almost the same, is from Social Security tax. This and state and federal taxes consume more of the income of the middle class and low income families than of the wealthy. 9% of federal revenues come from corporations. In the past few decades, taxes of the rich as a share of income fell by 2/3. During the same period, the taxes of the middle class have not decreased. The top 400 households have seen their share of income paid in federal income tax fall from 51.2% in 1955 to 16.6% in 2007. We don't have a spending problem. We have a revenue problem. G.W. Bush's tax cuts for the wealthy cost this country more than $700 billion. Time to take the blinders off, folks. Even the most ideological, with half his brain not tied behind his back, has got to admit that for at least the last 30 years, taxes have been raised on the backs of ordinary working people. In the last 35 years, government spending has not changed that much as a share of GDP. Under President Gerald Ford, it was 31.4%. With President Jimmy Carter, it was 30.7%. Under Ronald Reagan, spending was 32.2%. It was a bit higher than that under George H.W. Bush. While under President Bill Clinton, it was 30.3%, and under G.W. Bush, it was 31.6%. There is no evidence of runaway government spending. It's all right-wing propaganda. Government spending has been about the same under Republicans as well as Democrats. As stated above, what has occurred is that government has taken in less revenue due to tax cuts for the rich, corporate subsidies, and less corporate taxes And look at all the jobs created in the last 10 years. The G.W. Bush administration created maybe 4.4 million jobs. Some say 7 million. Yet we heard no talk about jobs and deficits during Bush's term. The Bush tax cuts never paid for themselves. The two wars were off the budget. Also Medicare Part D. All was on the credit card under Bush. Now, under Obama, they appear on the budget. Tax cuts simply lower revenues. It is becoming common knowledge in America that the rich are undertaxed. Government spending as a share of GDP today is 26%. It should be clear to all by now, after 10 years of Bush tax cuts, that they have simply reduced economic activity. We need to get back to the understanding that was prevalent after World War II, that high income taxes correlate with economic growth, while moderate taxes result in a flat economy. America's high growth periods were between 1941 and 1945, when the top income tax rate was 88.94%. Also, during the Truman and Eisenhower administrations, when the top rate was 81 to 92%. And during the Bill Clinton administration, which produced a surplus in his last years, when the rate was 37 to 39%. Since 1886, our laws and courts have treated corporations as if they had rights under our Constitution. The law, which supposedly gave human life to a creature of the state, was Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, 1886. This case involved property taxes that the county wanted the railroad to pay. The railroad claimed this violated the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause. The verdict in the case said nothing about corporate personhood. Because a California law could cover the case, there was no question of constitutionality. A non-legally binding headnote written by the court clerk J.C. Bancroft Davis stated that corporations are persons within the intent of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, which forbids states from denying any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Davis was a corrupt official who had been president of the railroad and worked with the corrupt Supreme Court Justice Stephen Field. The railroad had promised to sponsor Field's run for the White House if he helped them gain constitutional rights. Corporations as persons is a legal fiction, a myth. Money as speech and Citizens United are trash. There is no actual legal precedent giving corporations the same rights, as people under the Constitution. A corporation's charter can be revoked at any time. In the same vein, the Kidda precedent determining when a person is disabled is also a legal fiction, a myth. As it stands, our laws are corrupt. Our courts are corrupt. Our leaders in government are corrupt. Our institutions are corrupt. As we must do with our infrastructure, we must repair the old and build the new. Corporations are instruments of the state and are without conscience. They do not have the responsibilities of citizenship, nor the responsibilities of liability. They have more power and influence over our laws and ways of life than you or I. Corporations who are not paying their fair share of taxes in the first place were given elaborate tax breaks in 2002 and 2003. And American families, as usual, picked up the difference. We already know that General Electric pays no taxes, but ExxonMobil also paid no taxes on $50 billion profits. And again, guess who picked up the tab? When conservative Republicans talk about freedom, they mean the freedom for corporations to do what they want and freedom for you to shop. The poverty rate in the European Union in 2000 was 8%, while the poverty rate in the United States was 15.9%. Contrary to conservative Republican propaganda, the United States has one of the lowest total tax rates in the wealthy world. May we ask, where are the jobs? Today, the United States is last in life expectancy and the leader in infant mortality. As stated above, the United States leads all advanced economies in poverty. These events did not just come about naturally. Deliberate maldistribution of income was instrumental. Beyond social structures and types of economies, there are two ways of living. There is the get way of life and the give way of life. In the biblical sense, the give way of life is God's way, while the get way of life is Satan's way. God's way of dealing with poverty is the lifting of the poor out of poverty, not sustaining him in poverty. God requires the person with two coats to not just give one to the poor, but to give both. Mark 10, verses 17 through 24, Matthew 19, verses 17 through 20, and Luke 18, verses 22 through 23. Do the so-called Christians in the Republican Party understand this? Do they understand what is meant when they chant freedom? How can they claim that one is weak when dependent on government, and not see even more dependency and weakness when dependent on a corporation for a job, a livelihood, for survival? The devil's economics has the worker at the mercy of the employer. So much so that the employer can kill the worker and get away with it. God's economics avoids poverty by having every man have his own land and vine. Micah 4, verse 4. Why is it so much easier to demand that workers move to where the corporation is than to build the corporation where the need for jobs is? This doesn't mean in other countries where one can exploit labor and the environment. Poverty in America is not a cultural issue. It is a created issue. 80% of Americans are little more than wage slaves. Only 18% of Americans make $20 an hour, hourly workers. About 19% of our children out of the womb, live in poverty. Where are the voices for these? Perhaps embryos are more important than grown children. Change we can believe in would be ridding this country of the devil's economics. We could stop living by myth and devil-influenced ideology. It is time to understand that in some instances there is something wrong in making a profit, especially when it is made on the backs of the least among us. We need trade policies that make our country richer, not other countries. We must face certain facts about our country. We live in a fascist country. Fascism is simply the marriage of corporations with the state. Our democracy, our republic, is a fiction. Free trade is free only one way. Over 70% of Americans are suffering in this jobless recovery. The devil's economics has destroyed the heart and soul of America. Take the blinders off, people. It's time for a change we can believe in and accomplish. In regard to censored number 116, the article, "This Country Was Never a Christian Nation," we received a letter, and it goes like this. In regard to censored 116, "This Country Was Never a Christian Nation," just a word to debunk some points in censored 116. One reason pilgrims came was for religious freedom. Most, if not all, were Christians, but yes, certain policies and practices can be anti-Christian, and asking adults, not children, to work a little for food stamps is not one of them. Ronald Reagan, Thatcher, and Pope John Paul VI contributed to the freeing of Eastern Europe from the failed communist socialist system. President Obama wants to install that here under the guise of redistribution of wealth. Yes, we need to do better in this area. However, socialism is a system of bogus compassion where you get a limited amount of services from an elite state group who think you cannot think for yourself. An example of this is Orwellian political correctness. Speech that says perfectly correct words found in Webster's dictionary but are insensitive. We cannot become a nation of whiners saying every non-expletive crack is terrible. The recent financial crisis has government and private industry as its cause. Poor oversight led to greed and unbridled risk-taking. However, risk-taking built this nation, not government programs. We must discourage undue amounts of compensation for certain groups of employees. Over $5 million annually for CEOs, rock stars, actors, ball players, and the like. This would allow many more jobs to be created. Oil, TV, automakers, technology, pharmaceuticals must reduce the amount to a sane figure that staff are paid. Yes, government is overpriced as well. If I told you to write in censored, you would what? If I told you what to write in censored, you would say no way. If I asked politely to print a piece, you might on its merits. Socialists condemn things they don't like. They don't admit to being socialist until they gain control. We need to improve this country. Straight Obama leftist socialism, and you can bet he is one, or unbridled capitalism are not the answer. Successful capitalism is like a car doing 65 miles per hour. It needs a toll booth and a red light along the way to arrive safely. Ralph Giordano, New York. And here's the editor's answer. Working for food stamps is wrong on many levels, but I'm certain that the devil's economics presents the answer. I cannot really answer your comments concerning President Obama because he was never mentioned in the article, "This Country Was Never a Christian Nation." I can say, however, that President Obama is not a socialist, he is a corporatist. The socialism that you're struggling with is in fact fascism, a marriage between government and corporations, and the socialism part comes in when government gives subsidies and tax breaks to profitable corporations. As far as political correctness is concerned, conservatives are offended by the 21st century. I'm not sure what risk taking you are referring to that built this nation. Perhaps it was free land given to the railroads and to people to move west. It certainly isn't risk taking when Wall Street banksters lose and get bailed out by taxpayers. Again, when you are referring to socialism, you are in fact talking about totalitarianism. Socialism is an economic system, as an economic system, is merely that government, the people, own the means of production. This country was never a Christian nation, spoke about God's economics, not socialism. It contrasted some of God's economics with our form of capitalism. The end.